Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be revisiting my readings from 2017. So in 2017 I started writing down the books I've read. I tried this a few years earlier and it didn't quite stick, but I started it back up again in 2017 and it's stuck ever since. So I have going on 4 years. Well, for 2021, it'll be the fourth batch of this. Or technically fifth batch of this. So depending how this goes, I might do 2018 next week and maybe even 2019. And then hold off on 2020 and beyond for a few years. So anyway, let's see what I read in January of 2017, which was a quite difficult month, not only because of the inauguration of Trump, but some personal life stuff. So, the first book I read, or attempted to read, in January of 2017 was LaRose by Louise Erdrich, or Erdrich. It's the story of a hunting accident. A father and his son are hunting a deer and accidentally kill the only child of a neighboring couple. And to make up for this, the father who killed the boy gives them his child, LaRose. And then I think there's also a more historical aspect of this as well, of a previous LaRose in her life, and I think maybe even a third narrative too of a grandparent or something, like a middle ancestor between the first LaRose and the contemporary LaRose. And I got some ways into the book and then I bailed. I didn't quite like it. And I think I've tried another book by Erdrich and I don't think I quite got along with it either. But I could be wrong. So that was LaRose. And next was Burger's Daughter by Nadine Gordimer. So 2017 was a bit of the year of Burger's Daughter and Cat's Eye. So I first read Burger's Daughter in January, and then I had another go at it later because I wasn't satisfied with this reading. It didn't work for me. And in fact, in my little mini review, I mentioned that the most interesting character was Conrad. For obvious maybe obvious reasons. There's a particular scene that's quite captivating. But I feel with Burger's Daughter that the character of, I think her name's Rosa, never comes into her own as a character. She's always just her father's daughter. And I never quite got into that. I have a bit of a weird reading relationship with Nadine Gordimer. I read her novel The House Gun, which came out in the late 90s, in the very early 2000s, as a high school senior. And while it's a very difficult to get into at first, Nadine Gordimer's style progressively got more complicated, more difficult as she got older. And I did find difficulty getting into it at first, but then once I got accustomed to her style, I really liked it. But I've struggled to get into anything else by her. I've tried Burger's Daughter twice. I think I've gone at Mice and Story about 2 or 3 times, and I'm not particularly fond of it. and I've read bits of Jump, and again, haven't gotten into it. So, next, the third book I read in January of 2017 was Midnighter Volume 1 by Steve Orlando. I'm not terribly fond of Midnighter as a character, so for those of you who don't know, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a sort of creator rebellion in the comic book industry. For decades, the two big comic book publishers are Marvel and DC. And in the early 90s, a number of more popular creators banded together to strike out on their own and created Image. And there were also a number of other smaller comic book publishers coming out around this time as well. Most of them folded or eventually ended up getting gobbled up by Marvel or DC. One of these imprints or small publishers was Wildstorm, which would eventually be gobbled up by DC. And I think for a while it operated on its own separate universe, but with the New 52 in 2011, the Wildstorm universe became incorporated into the proper DC universe. And one of the things about the Wildstorm universe is that they have their own version of the Justice League called Stormwatch or the Authority. And among their members are versions of Batman and Superman, in this case called Midnighter and Apollo. Midnighter is the Batman equivalent. He's cybernetically enhanced to where he's a supreme tactician, hand-to-hand combatant, and Apollo is basically Superman. And they're a gay couple. So with the New 52 and the incorporation of Stormwatch into the DC universe proper, they brought in Midnighter and Apollo and the rest of the team. And the series didn't last long. And I think towards the end of the New 52 or the beginning of Rebirth, around the time of Grayson, when Dick Grayson became more of a spy than Nightwing, Midnighter had his own series for about 2 volumes. And this is the first one, where he's investigating the theft of the location where he gets his technology. He's broken up with Apollo, and he takes up with this new guy who turns out to be the villain Prometheus. And I had mixed opinions of this volume. I like the artwork. I like some of the plotting, although not necessarily thrilled with how they or how Orlando sort of handled the confrontation with Prometheus. I thought Prometheus could have had a better showing than what it ultimately was, but that is one thing about comics or superhero comics is the villains have a really intricate 5-issue plan or something, and then they kind of fold up at the very end. And that's kind of what happened with Prometheus, which I think kind of knocked some of my enjoyment. So the fourth book I read in January of 2017 is The Harder They Come by T.C. Boyle. And I really liked it, which is a shock because I have struggled with T.C. Boyle's work for years. So I first tried to read his Watermark, which I think is his first novel, years ago, and I didn't get into it. And then I wanted to do historical fiction reading challenge. Historical fiction is one of those genres of fiction that I don't particularly get on with. I would much rather just read history than read nonfiction. And one of the books I selected for the historical fiction challenge was The Road to Belleville by T.C. Boyle. And I got some ways into it, but I ended up bailing on it. It didn't work for me. It's been quite a while, so I don't quite remember what was wrong with it. And then I came to The Harder They Come, and surprisingly, I really liked it. Although I think maybe it's because The Harder They Come is markedly different from most of T.C. Boyle's work. Most of his work is, I think, historical fiction. I mean, there might be some more contemporary stuff too, but it's mostly historical. And there's also a bit of the thriller with The Harder They Come. It's the story of a retired high school principal, his son, and a woman who occasionally was a substitute teacher, who's become very engrossed in the militia movement, or some kind of right-wing, hyper-libertarian, non-compliance ideology. Her and the principal's son have a relationship, and she further radicalizes him. He's a small-time drug dealer, but he sort of becomes a bit more radicalized. And I just found the novel engrossing and really good. I think it was one of my favorite novels of 2017. And I think there might be one or two more T.C. Boyle novels on here, because I also read The Women, which is about Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, which I didn't particularly get on with, and a collection of short fiction, which, again, didn't particularly get on with. So, next is The Fortunes by Peter Ho Davies. I didn't really get on with this book at all. I bailed pretty quickly. Next is View with a Grain of Sand by Visela Zamborska. She's one of my favorite poets, and I've talked about this collection numerous times. I reread it again in 2020, and yeah, so it's one of my favorite. She is one of my favorite poets. From there, I read Angel Maker by Nick Harkaway, or I bailed on it. I found it really silly. I don't remember much about it, though, so I probably ought to really revisit this one, particularly since there's one or two other books by him that I do want to try. Next is another graphic novel, or the next few are going to be graphic novels. Thor Volume 1, Goddess of Thunder by Jason Aaron. This introduces Jane Foster's run as Thor. I really liked it. I thought, the idea of Jane Foster becoming Thor temporarily is quite good and interesting, and depending how it was handled, could have been really good. I'm not entirely fond of sort of the cartoonish way that Jason Aaron depicted most of the villains in this arc are. They're like really cartoonishly misogynistic. That kind of is a bit more grating. And I maybe would have preferred a more nuanced, a bit more complicated look at it. I would also have preferred a better way to handle the notions of identity with this. Because in a way, Thor loses Thor, the son of Odin, in a way loses his identity. And I think a bit more could have been done with that, as well as Jane Foster trying to acclimate to being a new Thor. But I mean, on the whole, I did like it. I think we'll revisit Thor later because I think I read volume 2, which ends up suffering the usual Aaron second volume slump. But anyway, I also read Doctor Strange Volume 1, The Way of the Weird by, again, Jason Aaron. This one I didn't care for. I don't think Jason Aaron really knew what he was doing when he wrote Doctor Strange. Nothing really worked at all. He's trying to be Kieran Gillen or Al Ewing, and it just really doesn't work. I don't think Doctor Strange is a character that Aaron naturally has a grasp on. So next is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. I've had a weird reading relationship with this book. I read it a few years ago, or from 2017. I think maybe not quite when it first came out, but around the time the television series came out. And I didn't particularly care for it. So it might have been 2015 or maybe even 2016. And I remember bailing on it the first time I read it. So in this reading, I did like it a lot more. My opinion changed, although it is still very mixed. I love the Holden chapters. I think those chapters are really strong, really compelling. Excellently done. The Miller chapters, I'm not as fond of. That's the chapters in which I bailed on. And while I didn't quite bail on those chapters this time, I still am not particularly fond of those chapters. I thought they're too... they're too film noir. They're too hard-boiled detective. They're, too reminiscent of 1930s, 1940s hard detective fiction. With your stereotypical private eye who ends up falling in love with whatever woman it happens to be involved in the case, and it just didn't really work. It's just like, I've been here before and I've seen it done better. So yeah, so it's a very mixed bag. Fortunately, Miller, this is his only real book. He leaves as a point of view character after this, and from here, I think Holden's character stays throughout the series, but the second POV character, I think changes. And I want to say I probably read the second book in the series the following month, but I could be wrong. And we'll see, obviously, in February if I decide to follow up on these videos. So that concludes what I actually read in January of 2017. Not a whole lot, unfortunately. Which actually kind of surprised me. I thought I had read more. But anyway. So let me know what you thought of this video. If I should continue with January of 2018 next week. Although if I have nothing better to do, I might go ahead and do it anyway, because I don't usually film on Monday, so this might be a good filming idea I'd like to do. And I will see you next week with January of 2018. So anyway, BookTube, Until then, and until tomorrow, I'll hopefully have a tag up. So anyway, BookTube, I will see you hopefully tomorrow with a tag. I'm rambling now, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, have a great afternoon, and please stay safe.